All right. So good stormy afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the, I'm not sure how many online FOCAP news forums we've already had. I think this is probably the 37th or the 38th edition of the FOCAP online news forum. My name is Barnaby Lowe. I'm with CBS News and I am a board member of the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines, or FOCAP. Today, we are fortunate to have distinguished panelists talking about the development of COVID-19 vaccines. Headlining this event, no less than the Department of Science and Technology Secretary, Fortunato de la Peña, who is a chemical and industrial engineer by profession. He taught at the University of the Philippines for more than 40 years and has been with the DOST since the 1980s. Good afternoon, Secretary de la Peña. Welcome to this FOCAP forum.
Can I have your nickname again?
Barnes. You may call me Barnes, as in Barnes and Noble.
Barnes. Yeah. Good
Barnes
afternoon.
and Noble, the bookstore.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe by way of background, you might be wondering, I was teaching for 43 years. At the same time, I was at the DOST. So actually, we have arrangements at the university wherein we can be seconded to government agencies. So
right.
In my case, I was seconded 3 times to the Department of Science and Technology over a certain period of time. So I was seconded here from 1982 to 1984 as a planning head.
Yes.
That was still the time of President Marcos. Then again in 1989 to 1991 as director of the Technology Application and Promotion Institute of the Department of Science and Technology. That was already under President Aquino. And then from 2001 to 2010, I was seconded as undersecretary under President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. That was the longest secondment. And then I continued to serve as undersecretary during the time of President Pinoy Aquino for 4 more years. But at that time, I was no longer a plantilla position holder at UP. So I transferred already to the DOST at the time. And then I retired, compulsory retirement in 2014.
Yes.
I turned 65. And then I was called again to serve in 2016. So, but during the time I was with DOST, I continued to teach. So my 43 years of teaching was continuous.
Right.
Even if it was only one subject a semester during the later years.
So, I mean, what a career in science and in the academe and in government service, huh? All right. Now, joining Secretary de la Peña, of course, are Dr. Beaver Temesis, the first Filipino president and managing director of American pharmaceutical company, MSD in the Philippines. He's also the head of the Pharmaceutical and Healthcare Association of the Philippines, or PHAP. And then, last but not the least, we have Dr. Jean-Antoine Zinzou, who prior to becoming the general manager of Sanofi Pasteur in the Philippines, spent years working on vaccinations in Africa, Latin America, and the rest of Asia. Now, MSD, or Merck, internationally known as Merck, and Sanofi, of course, are involved in the development of COVID-19 vaccines. And we'd like to thank PHAP for supporting this forum. Now, all 3 of our guests have slide presentations, but we will start with Dr. Beaver Temesis. So, Dr. Temesis, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so let me open my deck. Can everybody see my slides?
Not yet, Dr. Temesis.
Not yet. Can everybody see it now?
Not yet.
Wait, let me try again. Sharing screen. Okay. How about now?
There it is.
There it is. Okay, good, great. So thank you first and foremost for the invitation, for the kind invitation to speak today. Uh, okay, yeah. So first and foremost, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak to everybody today. I think we are in a crazy time period, and I think the research-based pharmaceutical companies are really in a unique position to really help address this pandemic that we're really dealing with today. First and foremost, of course, is the speeding up of research and development of safe and effective vaccines. There have been multiple efforts throughout the world to actually support the rapid development of vaccines. The warp speed response of the United States, and then the accelerator response of all of these organizations, such as the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, the Gavi, the WHO, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, etc. At the same time, aside from discovering a safe and effective vaccine, most important will obviously be manufacturing. So we are again in unique positions to be able to use not only our own facilities, but to actually also mobilize other potential partners to be manufacturing vaccines for us in the event that we finally discover and have a workable vaccine that's actually safe and effective. Next slide. Having said that, let's not get our hopes too high, right? Because really, with this next slide, you can clearly see that vaccines are complex. It's not easy. It's not as easy as manufacturing a few powders and putting them together in the tablet and off you go. You really have to grow these things, right? And you have to have a lot of quality testing. It takes a longer production time for the most part and requires stringent quality testing and regulation at all stages. And let me say that even with established vaccines that we've been making for decades, you can have a batch of your manufacturing that ends up with zero usable vaccine. So it can be a bit of a hit or miss. Vaccines are complex. They're not simple. But at the same time, we do have to go after it, right? And again, just to show you how complex the vaccine world is, there are at least 4 different types of platforms or different types of vaccines. You have the whole virus vaccine, the viral vector vaccines, genetic vaccines, and then the protein-based vaccines. Right now, most of the leading candidates that we will hear are the viral vector vaccines and the genetic vaccines. Among the viral vector vaccines, you have the Chinese vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine. Among the genetic vaccines, you have here the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. So really, you need this portfolio of different types of vaccines and different types of vectors to be able to address potentially and find the best vaccine to be able to work. Who knows? Some of these may not actually work, right? I mean, like, again, just to show you how complex and how accelerated already the process has really compressed the time element here. Classically, a vaccine can take anywhere in the preclinical stage of 18 to 13 months. Today, they've actually accelerated this. It's not really 0 months, but really within a couple of months, people started identifying candidates, especially after the Chinese published the genome of the coronavirus. Phase 1, this is probably the most critical at the get-go. Do you have a potential candidate? And that's really requiring volunteers. Traditionally, it can take 30 months. This time around, it was like, what, 2 months? I mean, like, people were really accelerating this process, this bit. Phase 2, hundreds of volunteers, approximately 32 months. This time around, it was actually much shorter. We had it in less than 6 months. Phase 3, which is where now a lot of the candidate vaccines are now, traditionally took up to 30 months. Now, I mean, like, people are counting, like, if you can get first patient in, maybe you can get the last patient out by X date, and then additional couple of months for safety. We're talking 6 months, 6 to 8 months. That's a huge change from the 30 months before. And then, of course, finally, manufacturing approvals, manufacturing, and actual vaccination. Now, if you follow the New York Times, they do publish this coronavirus tracker. I do encourage people to take a look at it because it is a really nice summary of all of the vaccines where they are to date. And you can, initially, phase 1, I saw earlier versions of this. This was in the hundreds. But you can see now quickly how quickly candidates got eliminated. And right now, we have about 11 vaccines in the phase 3 trials. Some have already limited approvals, particularly in China and in Russia. But really, I think that where everybody's really most interested in would be in the phase 3 trials. And these, again, are just some of the organizations that are supporting the rapid development of these vaccines. And this particular chart shows some of these candidates. You have here the Pfizer vaccine, which is a joint thing with the joint project with this BioNTech of Germany. Moderna, which is an American company. Both of these companies are using messenger RNA type vaccines. The Oxford University AstraZeneca collaboration, which hit a road bump, but now is really back on track finally for their own phase 3 trials. You have 3 Chinese companies here doing their own stages already of vaccination and trials. Then the very famous, at least for about a week, Russian vaccine, which is now finally entering phase 3 trials. And then whole slew of other companies, including J&J, Sanofi, and my own company. So really, at this point in time, it's really being accelerated very rapidly, but the system is actually still working. Why? Why do I say that? The US FDA has managed to insist and put into their guidelines a requirement that each company must provide at least 2 months of safety data after the last patient has gotten vaccinated. That's really important because now you hopefully can actually allow any small or rarer side effects to come out so that we're sure that the vaccine is actually safe. So the system is working. The pause that AstraZeneca went through, that J&J also went through, they recently had pauses, but now the trials have resumed. These were pauses to allow them to really double check that the patients were not unnecessarily exposed, that there wasn't any unnecessary side effect that was suddenly looming coming out of these particular vaccine trials. So the system actually works. I think we can trust in the system so long as they go through the different phases and we actually have the right number of patients enrolled in these various clinical trials. So how do we now get these vaccines abroad to all of the patients? We actually really have to think strongly about preparing for how we can equitably distribute vaccines. So which is why I encourage everybody in this room to actually take a look at the COVAX facility that's been set up by Gavi, the United Nations, a whole slew of other companies, really to be able to understand how potentially the Philippines can avail of vaccines. The target price is about $21 for 2 vaccine doses. If the target price is not met, then the countries may opt out and actually shop on their own and negotiate with the other companies. And the COVAX AMC is actually the financing arm, looking at the potentially how to support 92 lower middle income and low income economies to be able to purchase vaccines. So this is something I know the Philippine government has actually signed up for, but there are contracts that need to be signed. So they have to deal with that. And I'd encourage everybody who wants to know more about this COVAX facility to just take a look at this YouTube video that, and here's the URL on the screen. I don't have enough time to share it at this point in time, but it can be quite helpful to help us all understand how this COVAX facility can help in the Philippine setting. So with that, that's all I had. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Beaver Temesis, for that very enlightening presentation. I'd like to go back to Secretary Dela Peña if you're ready with your slide presentation, and then go to Dr. Zinsu. But if you're not ready, Secretary Dela Peña, then we can go to...
Yeah, I think we can share already the PowerPoint. Enrico, you are already there?
Okay, great.
I will share my screen now.
Okay. All right.
This one, sir, right?
Go ahead.
Papa.
Take it away.
Some of the information here were already touched on by Dr. Tamesi, so I'll just go quickly on those portions. Okay, so this is on the COVID-19 vaccine trials Philippines. Okay, so what one must know on the Philippine vaccine trials. Next slide, please. Okay, so it says here that the vaccine trials are important for managing the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, the next few months will be crucial as the world works towards developing a vaccine for COVID-19. However, there is still much that needs to be shared with the public, and we hope that this sort of primer will help. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, anyway, this is some kind of a table of contents of the primer, wherein you have the introduction, and then the participation in clinical trials, and then contextualizing vaccine trials in the Philippine setting, and then the conclusion. So next slide, please. So it's just, this one defines a vaccine clinical trial, also known as clinical research. These are medical studies that involve people, and this is the process of evaluating the safety, immunogenicity, and protective efficacy in humans of a novel vaccine candidate before license for use. So the vaccine clinical trials explore whether investigational vaccines are safe and effective for humans. The diagram below was already shown, I think. It gives you the different phases. So you have the preclinical, the phase 1 with a small number of people that are tested for safety. Phase 2, a bigger number, about between 100 to 1,000 to test the effectiveness or efficacy. And the phase 3 is tested in a larger group to confirm the efficacy and safety when compared to other treatments. Next slide, please. Well, how do the clinical trials work? They follow a plan called a protocol that describes what volunteers will be doing and what they can expect from the research team. The protocol is carefully designed to balance the potential benefits of a trial with the risk to participants. And the protocol also answers the specific questions like what are the research objectives, what are the eligibility requirements, what are the protections against risks to participants, the details about the test procedures and treatments, and the expected duration or how long the study will last, and other information to be gathered. So each clinical trial has criteria describing who can join. So here, children as well as adults, healthy volunteers and patients, and people of a diverse range of ethnic and racial backgrounds can and are encouraged to participate in the clinical trials according to the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Then we define that in the trials, there will be volunteers that will be assigned to specific study groups. Okay, one group will be the ones given the vaccine for trial, and others may receive a placebo or a comparator vaccine in order to assess its efficacy. Next slide, please. So I think we explain here the need for clinical trials because every new vaccine, medicine, treatment, or preventive medical intervention started with volunteers participating in clinical trials. We owe our current high standards of medical care to studies that have been conducted in the past. Clinical trials provide a scientific basis for advising and use of medical products for treating patients or preventing the possible occurrence of these illnesses in people. Next slide, please. So the question is, are clinical trials safe? The Food and Drug Administration is the government agency responsible for regulating the conduct of clinical trials in the country. So the FDA has regulations for clinical research to protect the participants from unreasonable risk. Before any clinical trial is allowed to be conducted in the country, a rigorous review process is followed by the FDA and partner evaluators to ensure the safety of the trials. So aside from the solidarity trials, which we have been mentioning, overseas clinical trials and pre-qualification from the WHO, the Philippine government has established additional measures to ensure vaccine safety and efficacy. So the the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases established or created the Sub-Technical Working Group on Vaccine Development, and created, on the other hand, the Sub-TWG created the DOST Vaccine Expert Panel, which is composed of a group of technical experts and scientists tasked to identify, evaluate, and recommend possible vaccine candidates for the Philippines. Then we have the Department of Health Technology Assessment Unit as well, and as well as different medical and specialty societies. They have also suggested to the IATF safety nets to ensure vaccine safety when already in use through pharmacovigilance and surveillance. Question is, are there possible side effects? Yes, vaccination of investigational drugs or vaccines may have side effects, including pain, redness, itchiness, or swelling at the injection site, which might last a few hours. Other side effects may also include fever, feeling of weakness or fatigue, headache, dizziness, diarrhea, and nausea. However, during the trial, the attending physician will determine if the side effects are causally related to the vaccines. Participants are also given diary cards and are expected to report to the vaccine trial monitors any side effects or developments of COVID-19 signs and symptoms during the clinical trial period. Generally, the benefits of taking the vaccine outweighs the risk associated with its side effects. Next slide, please. Just to familiarize with the terms, the clinical trial is any research study that prospectively assigns human participants or groups to one or more health-related interventions to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. This is from WHO. And then a definition of a vaccine as a substance which contains a microorganism or virus in a weakened, live, or killed state, or proteins or toxins from the organism used to stimulate the production of antibodies and provide immunity against one or several diseases. Immunization is the process by which a person becomes protected against a disease through vaccination. Sometimes this is used interchangeably with vaccination or inoculation. And vaccination is the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. Placebo is an inactive substance or other intervention that looks the same as and is given the same way as a vaccine being tested. The effects of the vaccine or other intervention are compared to the effect of the placebo. Protocol, it's a document that describes how a clinical trial will be conducted, including the objectives, the design, the methodology, the statistical and considerations, and the organization of a clinical trial, and ensures the safety of the trial subjects and integrity of the data collected. Immunity is protection from an infectious disease. If you are immune to a disease, you can be exposed to it without being infected. A volunteer is a person who takes part in a clinical trial, and solidarity trial pertains to the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials led by the WHO, which aims to harness a global cooperation to develop and evaluate vaccine candidates as quickly as possible, to identify vaccine candidates and their progress, to define the desired characteristics of safe and effective vaccines to combat the pandemic, and coordinate the clinical trials across the world, giving the best chance of safe and effective vaccine for all. COVAX, the COVAX facility, co-led by Gavi, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI, and the WHO is a platform that aims to accelerate the development and manufacture of COVID-19 vaccines and to ensure that every country in the world is able to access the successful vaccines. Next slide, please. Why participate in trials? Well, first of all, if you love yourself and family, this will be the information generated from your participation is very valuable. Okay, successful or not, the information is helpful in showing what did not work and pushing research in a different direction. Love of country. When you participate in the trial, you are helping our country to have access to potential vaccine candidates and solidarity with the world. Now, what is informed consent? Before a participant agrees to volunteer in a clinical trial, he or she has the right to know and understand what will happen during the course of the study. This is called informed consent, and it is a process that can help a participant decide whether or not participating in a trial is right for him or her. When the volunteer gives a written consent to participate in a clinical trial, the volunteer acknowledges that he or she understands and accepts all the aspects of the research study, including any risks or benefits involved. Next slide, please. Well, there are certain myths. I will not go through them one by one, like participating in the trial will give me immunity to COVID-19. Does not guarantee it. Okay, remember that the clinical trials are conducted to test the immunogenicity and efficacy of the vaccine under study. Or I will earn money by participating in this. Participants will only receive a minimum allowance to reimburse meals and transportation, and of course the disturbance that it may have on your work that generates income for you. I can participate in multiple clinical trials for different vaccine. A volunteer can only participate in one clinical trial. I don't have the right to refuse invitation to participate at any time and for any reason. You can quit the clinical trial. The vaccines in clinical trials will treat patients of COVID-19. Vaccine is not similar to drugs. Okay, clinical trials are a waste of time and effort. Well, the trials lead to the discovery of new ways to prevent diseases. So it is not a waste of time and effort. Vaccines have no side effects. They have, as I had already indicated. Next slide, please. Go ahead. Well, continuing with the myths, it is okay to participate in trials that are not FDA approved. It is not okay. Okay. Next slide, please. Now, who reviews and approves the trials? At least here in the Philippines, all applications for clinical trials should first be submitted will first be screened for, keep it still. All potential recipients, wait, please bring it back to the earlier one. Yeah, who reviews and approves? All applications for trials should be first submitted to the sub-technical working group for vaccine development, and that is how DOST was involved, because the IATF designated DOST to chair the sub-TWG, which involves many different agencies, DOH, DFA, DTI, and FDA, for example. And what are the rights of the clinical trial participants? They have the right to ask, they have the right to full disclosure, they have the right to be informed of the risk. Next slide, please. They have also the right to clear information, they have the right to decide, right to refuse, right to no compensation, if any, and the right to privacy and confidentiality. Also the right to your beliefs, okay? And the right to documents, the right to post-trial care, and the right to complain. So how privacy of the participant is protected? Information about participants in a clinical trial is confidential and can only be accessed by the researchers or doctors who implement the trial. So in fact, the key aspect of the ethics review is ensuring that the research team will carry out steps and measures to ensure the participants' information as secure and confidential to the best extent possible. Next slide, please. So who can join the trials? All potential recipients of the vaccines under the clinical trial will first be screened for certain inclusion and exclusion criteria. These criteria include physical examination, general state of health, and ability to follow instructions, among others. Laboratory tests will also be performed, such as baseline RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2 virus, the antigen test, the clinical chemistry examinations to detect abnormalities or disease conditions that may not be detected on physical exam. Next, how to enroll. For COVID-19 vaccine trials, there will be groups who will be prioritized to participate, such as healthcare workers, frontliners, and contacts of COVID-19 cases. Participants from the community will be informed about the clinical trial through mass communications with the help of community leaders and health personnel. Orientation meetings and other forms of social media communications may be used with posters, brochures, and others. Next slide, please. So what are the risks? As I said, there are certain side effects, as I mentioned, like pain, redness, itchiness, or swelling in the injection site. Others can be fever, feeling of weakness or fatigue, headache, dizziness, diarrhea, and nausea. And as I said, during the trial, the attending physician will determine if the side effects are causally related to the vaccines. Of course, there will be a trial monitor for this. Next slide, please. What can participants get from the trial? Well, they will be given excellent healthcare services and will be closely monitored by the attending physicians. They will also receive a minimal allowance to reimburse meals and transportation associated with participation in the clinical trial. Next slide, please. So contextualizing vaccine clinical trials in the Philippine setting, WHO leads the Solidarity Trial for Vaccines, which aims to harness a global cooperation, and so on. But there will be also independent clinical trials. Other vaccine developers can conduct independent clinical trials in the Philippines, provided that they will be able to fund their own trials and register their application with the FDA. Remember, the FDA is the gatekeeper. Okay, they approve whether the trial will proceed or not. Next slide, please. So I have already described the application passes to the sub-technical working group, wherein the vaccine expert panel examines the data that are submitted by the vaccine developer, but of course that's covered by confidentiality disclosure agreement. And then after the technical evaluation, of course they have to make sure that the Ethics Research Board approves the protocol, and then it is then submitted to FDA for regulatory review and approval for the conduct of clinical trials. Next slide, please. What happens when the clinical trials end? After a clinical trial is completed, the researchers carefully examine the information collected during the study before making decisions about the meaning of the findings and about the need for further testing. Results from these trials are often published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Once a new approach has been proven safe and effective in a clinical trial, it may become a new standard of medical practice. There are economic benefits of vaccination. It's regarded as one of the most cost-effective health interventions. They reduce the risk of people catching a disease, making it safer for people to go about their activities, work, and travel. It also helps prevent productivity loss by preventing occurrence of illness and absence from work. So investment in vaccination translates also to savings in healthcare and actually savings of lost wages and productivity loss due to illness and death. And I think we are nearing the end of this transparencies. So go ahead. What can I do to help? This is for people, for policymakers, be updated on latest developments and enact policies and laws that are evidence-driven. Avoid sharing fake news and be the authority in sending out correct and credible information to your constituents. For community leaders, keep your respective communities informed about the latest on clinical trials. Invite experts who can discuss the ongoing initiative, particularly during town hall meetings, and then maximize the use of social media of the localities by posting the materials developed by the county's vaccines communications team. Disseminate flyers and information materials in your localities to avoid spread of fake news and protect your constituents from illegal vaccine vendors. And next slide, next slide, next slide. What can I do to help? For healthcare workers, get your information straight from the expert, okay, by participating in DOH administered communication trainings and be an active participant in communicating vaccine awareness. And for the general public, avoid sharing fake news about the clinical trials and vaccines. Fake news surrounds the online platform. Make it a habit to get your information from trusted sources, in this case, the DOH and the DOST. And I think finally, these are the contact details. Hold it. So we have the FDA, well, the DOST, Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, is our main agency involved here. Of course, DOST, because we have the Undersecretary of DOST for R&D chairing the sub-WG, assisted by the Assistant Secretary for International Collaboration. Next, the set of contact details for FDA and for the DOH. This is about all, but I can also, without using any more transparencies, share additional information. For example, to date, there are 3 vaccine developers that have submitted their phase 3. So we can remove the sharing of screen now. There are 3 vaccine developers who have submitted their phase 3 clinical trial applications. I am referring to Sinovac. This is an independent trial application. This is part of the bilateral cooperation between the Philippines and China. So the vaccine expert panel review was completed, and then we are just awaiting the response of Sinovac in the evaluation that was made, and also the additional requirements requested by the ethics board. The Gamaleya of Russia is also an independent clinical trial. We have bilateral collaboration on science and technology with Russia, and we are awaiting submission of remaining requirements needed by the vaccine expert panel, and also the review of the ethics review board. Janssen also has a signed confidentiality disclosure agreement, and they have an application for independent clinical trials. They are not a bilateral partner, but we are still awaiting for the submission of complete data needed for the review of the vaccine expert panel. In addition, we have a project team led by UPPGH for the WHO Solidarity Vaccine Trials. They have submitted the initial documents to the sub-technical working group for vaccine development. And this is expected to be supplemented once the final detailed protocol and list of vaccines will be released by the WHO. Okay. Now, the other developments are very fresh. So let me just read the latest development. Maybe this is not yet announced. It says here, according to the WHO, there are changes on the timelines of this WHO Solidarity vaccine trials. In the latest WHO briefing held last October 22, 2020, it was noted that the list of vaccines for the Solidarity vaccine trial may be released on October 26, 2020, which is today. So we are still expecting that it will be released today. Furthermore, the Americas were selected as the pilot sites for the Solidarity vaccine trials across the globe. The remaining sites, including the Philippines, are scheduled to start in December 2020. Now, we also received confirmation from IG Biotech and its partner, the Vaccine Pty Limited based in Australia. Vaccine is spelled VAXINE, and saying they are willing to conduct clinical trials and can be a prospective vaccine manufacturing in the country. Then we have updates on confidentiality data agreements. We are expecting the signing with the Tianyuan Biopharma of China and with Academia Sinica of Chinese Taipei. We have signed it at our end already. And then updates on the application of clinical trials. I have already mentioned that in the case of Sinovac, we are still awaiting the ethics clearance. And in the case of Gamaleya, there are still additional data that are being required. Okay, so these are the developments so far. For the Philippine WHO Solidarity Trials, for which we have been preparing, there is a list of 12 hospitals that will be involved. But so far, only 10, I think, have completed the documentary requirements. So this is led by PGH, and there are sites, 5 in Metro Manila. If we count the 12, there is 1 in Calabarzon, 1 in Cebu, and 1 in Davao.
Okay.
So this is the breakdown.
All right.
Thank you, Barnes.
Thanks so much, Secretary Dela Peña. I think we got a taste of Professor Dela Peña there. And I was going to ask Secretary Dela Peña about the latest developments, but he already spelled out all the latest developments in the vaccine trials. All right, so we'll go now to Dr. Zinsu of Sanofi Pasteur Philippines for his presentation. Take it away, Dr. Zinsu.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. Can you see my slide?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
There it is.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank the organizer for having me on this panel discussion. As you know, Sanofi is a research-based company, and we invest more than 6 billion in research and development each and every year. So we have a lot of projects that are in. Sorry, I received a message. You don't see my slide properly, I guess.
We see your PowerPoint, but it's not in a slide presentation form.
Is it better like this?
There it
You
is.
see?
Yes.
Okay. So as I said, and we are a research and development based company. We have many projects, 91 projects that are ongoing. We have 4 research and development hubs, and we have 39 projects in phase 3. We are present all over the world, and we have 73 manufacturing sites in 32 countries. And we also have a presence in 170 countries worldwide. So the reason why I'm showing all these numbers is just to show that one of the reliable contributor to the improvement of health of people is definitely Sanofi worldwide. But if I zoom on what we are doing on vaccines, in fact, we've been in the vaccines world ecosystem for more than a century now. And since then, we've been committed to extending the life-saving power of vaccination as broadly as possible. And as a matter of fact, as you can see, we are producing each and every year more than 1 billion doses of vaccines. And we are also involved in partnering for public health programs, notably vaccination programs led by UNICEF, Gavi, and for this, we are supplying 500 million doses of vaccines. And our portfolio is quite broad. We have vaccines against bacterial diseases and vaccines against viral diseases. So all in all, we have this huge experience that we are using to develop the COVID-19 vaccines. But while we can be extremely pleased by the results of the vaccination, because vaccination is saving life. In fact, we are saving worldwide 3 million lives each and every year. At the same time, due to low vaccination coverage, we have 1.5 million people who died from vaccine preventable disease. And to make a long story short, when it comes to our COVID-19 plan, we act on 3 different pillars, I will say. First, the research and development. Second, we have the manufacturing capacity, because you can develop a vaccine, but if you don't produce it at large scale, it's useless. But once you produce, it's also important for the vaccination program to be implemented. And these are the 3 pillars on which we are working concomitantly to speed up the process. The 2 candidate vaccines that we are working on is, first of all, a recombinant vaccine, which is based on an existing technology. And it's because we are using this existing technology that we can save time. This existing technology has been developed, co-developed with BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority of the US. And it's with this candidate vaccine that we are partnering with GSK producing the adjuvant that we are using for this vaccine. And this adjuvant is already validated, it has been used. So therefore, because we're using existing platform, we save time. Actually, in September, we entered into phase 1/2 for the development of this vaccine, and we hope to enter into phase 3 by the end of the year. Now, the second candidate vaccine that we are working on is an mRNA technology that we are developing in partnership with biotech called Translate Bio. It's a very innovative approach, and therefore it won't be available as soon as the previous candidate that I was mentioning to you, and probably will be able to start the phase 1 and 2 by the end of this year. Now, in terms of manufacturing capacity, as I mentioned to you, it's very important for us to increase this production capacity, because we know that it's a vaccine that will be needed worldwide. And this is why we have planned to produce for the first vaccine up to 1 billion doses at the end of next year. And for the second vaccines, thanks to the production capacity of Translate Bio, we should be able to have at a maximum of 360 million doses on an annual basis. But of course, we are working with our partner to increase this production capacity. Once again, it's important to produce a vaccine that is safe and efficacious, but it's also important to have the vaccination program well implemented. And in the specific case of COVID-19, as you know, the worldwide demand is huge, and therefore it's important to have a mechanism that will allow an ethical, a fair deployment of the vaccine, whatever the vaccine is, whether it is from Sanofi or from any other company. As a matter of fact, Sanofi is part of this COVAX facility to make sure that those who need the most the vaccine will have access to it. We are also partnering with the ICC AOK Pass project, which is really a project that will help people monitoring the level of or increasing the reliability of the vaccination that will be going on against COVID-19. It's an application that allows a digital copy of test and vaccination, and it's available through your device. And this is really something that will allow people and authority to trace the vaccine that is administered. And to summarize what I just said, in fact, what Sanofi is doing is really working on the 5 pillars. The 5 pillars when you want to implement a vaccination program: awareness, acceptance, affordability, access, and activation. In terms of awareness and acceptance, it's very important in the context of COVID-19 to understand the role of a vaccine, especially the role that it could play. Yes, the vaccine is a solution that will complement but not replace the existing preventive measures. People need also to understand that not everybody will get vaccinated at the same time, and there is a need for prioritization. And WHO has worked already on this prioritization. People need also to understand why there will be different level of efficacy, and each level efficacy correspond to an expected benefit for a given population. All this needs to be well explained, and when people reach this awareness, of course, they can accept the vaccination program. Affordability is a key question, and access as well. So as I mentioned previously, we are partnering with the COVAX facility to make sure that affordability is really well addressed, as well as access. And we are also benchmarking on our previous experience in terms of supply and delivery of vaccine. Activations is related to the activation of vaccination program. And here we are acting as public health partner of health authorities. This is what we are doing all over the world, but we are also doing that in the Philippines. So I will stop here just to allow people to ask questions, and I will be more than pleased to give you more details if need be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zinsu, for that presentation. I will now open the floor to questions, and we already have a couple of questions here from both our members in FOCAP and our friends from the Philippine media. Okay, first to ask is Jamela Alindogan of Al Jazeera. Jam?
Good afternoon, Secretary Dela Peña. Bonjour, Monsieur Zissou, and Dr. Tamesis, thank you for joining us. Apologies, I can't turn on my video because I'm actually not in Manila and the signal is really spotty. But thank you for joining us. I just have a question because we've been listening to your presentation, and you know, I could see the complexity of developing a vaccine, right? And we see that, you know, despite unprecedented global efforts of every company, of almost every government to really expedite this, it looks like it could really take time, which means that there is really concern about how we can basically allay anxieties of people wondering whether we can go back to a new normal or transform to a new normal, right? So in your assessment, Secretary or other distinguished gentlemen can answer, how long do you think before a vaccine can be distributed and given out to Filipino nationals? I mean, there's two factors here. The president has said that he would like to vaccinate over 100 million Filipinos, as many Filipinos as possible. That's one. And then there's also this concern about confidence when it comes to vaccine, because we've suffered when it comes to vaccine confidence in the past. So, you know, there was a debate, the first Trump debate, Biden debate. I was just watching it like a few weeks ago before Trump got coronavirus as well. He said that it could happen. Vaccine will not be developed until end of this year. It won't arrive until the summer in the US of next year. So when will that arrive to the Philippines? That would be. Secretary, if you'd like.
I will probably answer part of it, and maybe Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Chinsaw can help me. Number one, I was rather, shall we say, disappointed when I saw the news that the pilot for the WHO will be the Americas, and the trials here will have to be moved to December, because we were expecting that when it is already announced, then we can already proceed maybe in a few weeks time to proceed with the WHO trials here. But anyway, we have also the independent trials that are already in a relatively advanced stage of evaluation. And my own estimate is that if, for example, we can start the trials itself, let us say, even at the start of December or late November, because they say that the trials will be anywhere between 3 to 6 months. So, and as shown by the diagram earlier, this is already the compressed time. We still are looking at the end of the trials in the second quarter of 2021. And between the end of trials to the approval by FDA for application for use, and the actual vaccination, mass vaccination, it will still take some time. So I think our original estimate of mid 2021 is still the most optimistic, I would say, unless there are other products or other vaccines that will come in early and might have to, maybe would decide to just go straight ahead to FDA just for marketing purposes or supply without going through our sub-PWG. This is as far as I can go in that estimate. So maybe Dr. Tamesis can help, Dr. Xin Xiao can also help.
Yeah, Dr. Tamesis, Dr. Zinzu, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Mr. Secretary. I think, yes, mid-2021 is a bit optimistic. But yeah, I mean, like considering how far advanced the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are, we just heard the other day that Moderna had already enrolled the last patient in. So if we now count another month, because you have 2 doses, about 28 days apart. So that means the last patient will be actually done by sometime in the 3rd week of November, and then you count another 2 months worth of safety data. We're really looking at potentially sometime in January before a full dossier can be evaluated by, say, the US FDA and then finally approved. Now, if and when that particular vaccine actually musters approval, potentially, once we get the necessary documentation, CPP, etc., all these regulatory requirements, potentially somebody could market or we can get a vaccine approval from our FDA in as little as 4 to 6 months in normal times. But of course, this is an emergency. Potentially, that time frame again for regulatory approval could be accelerated by our FDA. And hopefully then, after that, plan on the distribution and how to roll out the national immunization program. The Department of Health does have skill in terms of rolling out national immunization program, but that really requires getting all the stakeholders engaged, the community, the doctors, the parents, the teachers, everybody involved, particularly the city mayor. Never underestimate the power of the city mayor in influencing the acceptance of vaccinations coming from the Department of Health. So yeah, mid-2021 is optimistic. I suspect we'll have to live with our current normal for the full of 2021. And the government does have to prioritize. Kanino unang bibigyan ng bakuna? 100 million in one go is not going to happen in the first month. So you have to prioritize. You have to select who your most vulnerable in society are, who are the people you want to protect so that they can continue rendering service. So that means constant research still on treatment options must continue so that we can actually have new treatments aside from the currently available ones. And of course, continuing the hygienic measures, face mask, frequent washing of hands, physical distancing, etc.
Dr. Zinzu?
Yes, I mean, I think almost everything has been said. The more optimistic scenario, at least from our side, is to have a vaccine available second half of 2021. But having a vaccine available, it's not all. You have really to make sure that those who need it the most are vaccinated. So in the meantime, you have 2 things to do. First, to educate, start educating people, start informing people, start preventing misinformation and disinformation on this vaccine. This is extremely important because it was mentioned the vaccine hesitancy. We need to tackle the vaccine hesitancy for this vaccine, and this will benefit the other programs of the DOH. It's very, very important that we do not stand still waiting for the vaccine to arrive. We have a lot of work to do to get prepared. And I've seen the DOH really involved in preparing the arrival of this vaccine. And on our side, as I mentioned, we want to raise the awareness, to make sure that people accept the fact that we will prioritize the administration of this vaccine. And in the meantime, as mentioned by Dr. Beaver, it's very, very important for each and every one of us to respect the safety measures.
Okay.
Maybe, Bart, can I just add a short, we are happy that sometime during the middle of October, about 2 weeks ago, it was the Metro Manila mayors to the MMDA who requested for a briefing from us. And so that actually showed their interest. They were asking what will be their role, what they can do to help, and of course some other details. And we are actually instructed by the IATF to also sign an agreement with the ILG, at least so that we can have a better assurance of local government support in the vaccination, well, in the trials and then in the vaccination program. After the trials, the DOST role is practically ended because the procurement will be handled by a separate sub-TWG, and I guess the actual vaccination program is under the DOH.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, you're good, Jam?
I'm all good. Thank you.
Okay. Next to ask is Caroline Bonkin of CNN Philippines. Caroline, you there?
Hello po, good afternoon po. I have a question actually I have a follow-up question about vaccine, but before that, I'd like to ask Secretary Dela Peña lang po, if you were already able to identify who will get the final doses of a successful vaccine, because the WHO said that it should be the health workers and the high-risk individuals, while the president said recently that it will be the poor, the soldier, and the police. So I'm just wondering if POSC already gave recommendations to the president as to who will get the first doses of a successful vaccine.
Well, first of all, as I have said, we are, in the case of the WHO trials, we are still awaiting the protocols that they will release, plus the name of the vaccines that will be put on trial. But in the meantime, our designated implementation, vaccine trials implementation team for the solidarity trials under the UP PGH, okay, is already making the preparations. Okay, so the identification of the hospitals where the trials will be made is also based on certain very, very important criteria, like the presence of experts in on vaccine trials, and of course the availability of facilities. Now, with respect to the priority in terms of the selection of those who will be involved in the trials, I think it was mentioned that we are encouraging the health workers, the frontliners to be the first ones, you know. But definitely there is an inclusion criteria and there is an exclusion criteria.
Pero for the successful vaccine,
Oops.
sir,
Caroline, hold on. Wonder where's the... Hold on. Okay, go ahead, Caroline.
sir, thank you for that. But that was for the candidate vaccines. How about for the successful vaccines, sir? Who will be the first ones to get the initial doses?
Successful from our trials here or trials elsewhere? Because our sub-TW is just involved in the trials that will be held here. As I said, there might be successful vaccines that will come in without even going to phase 3 trials in the Philippines. They will just have to get the approval of our FDA.
But for whatever successful vaccine that the Philippines will buy for the population, who will get the first doses, sir?
Who will get the vaccines?
The first doses, yes, sir.
Well, this is not, shall we say, in black and white, but from what we gather, the government, of course, will procure vaccines and will shoulder or parang subsidize the vaccines that will be needed by the people below the poverty level. You know, they are not the first ones, but I'm saying that in terms of getting the vaccines of the government, because we anticipate also there will be vaccines that will be procured by the private sector. Those who can afford can buy the vaccines. I mean, that is what we expect to happen. But in the case of the government vaccines, yun na nga, ang una will be the ones who are actually exposed, like the health workers, the frontline workers, okay, and those that are how do you call it, in the vulnerable side.
Okay. Sir, final question na lang po. Sir, could you give us more details about the possible clinical trials of vaccine in the Philippines? Did they already give a timeline on when they can submit the papers for the vaccine experts panel to review, and when they intend to start the trials here, and how they intend to manufacture the vaccines in case it passes the late stage trials? Thank you.
Well, frankly, I told you at the start that this is a very fresh news. I got it only before the opening of the interview, so it was the only available information that was passed on to me. I still cannot get full details. I only got information that this vaccine expressed interest in conducting clinical trials and possibly manufactured in the Philippines. But the details are not with me yet.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Caroline, you're good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Thank you, Secretary Dela Peña. Okay. Next in line is Jovic Yi of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Jovic?
Hi, good afternoon. My question is for Secretary De La Peña. I think it was in August when the vaccine expert panel first released the inclusion criteria for the solidarity trials, and they said that they would want participants who are healthy and 18 to 59-year-old. My question is, aren't we going to encounter problems if we are testing candidate vaccines on one set of the population and then would primarily give it to another set of population? Because as far as I understand, President Duterte wants to give it to 20% of the population, and part of that population are the poor elderly with comorbidities.
Maybe what you are talking about would be the use of the vaccines that will be procured by government. On the other hand, what I was saying would be the criteria for selecting the volunteers for the clinical trial. And I read it actually in the presentation that each clinical trial has criteria describing who can join. Children as well as adults, healthy volunteers and patients, and people of a diverse range of ethnic and racial backgrounds can and are encouraged to participate in the trials, but they have to undergo physical examination, laboratory testing, and other tests just to make sure that they are in the group that are not, shall we say, that can be vulnerable. Okay, because if you have comorbidities, and Dr. Tamesis can probably attest to this, they will not be included.
Okay. Jovic, do you have another question?
Maybe just a clarification, Sec. So if we test a particular vaccine on this set of the population, wouldn't we encounter adverse health effects if these particular vaccines are given to those who have comorbidities? Because as you mentioned, we are going to test it on a set of population who don't have comorbidities. So aren't we going to encounter complications if we give this vaccine to a set of population with comorbidities?
During the vaccination itself,
Yes, sir.
The vaccination program after the trials na yun, ano?
Yes, sir.
Siguro I will ask the help of Dr. Tamesis in this case. You remember, I was introduced as an engineer, and here are the doctors who are better informed.
Okay, Dr. Meses then.
All right. Thank you for the question. These are very, very good questions and a lot of insight, right? I think that if you follow the news that was going on in about the COVID and Pfizer trials, one of the issues that they faced was that they did not have diverse enough populations enrolled, meaning they didn't have a broad enough section of the population that they could actually now actually say that yes, the vaccine is efficacious and safe in this broad set of population. So I think you're going straight for the heart of the matter. Are the trials being conducted broad enough? Do they have enough diversity in the patient populations enrolled? Maybe one site or one particular protocol will have a narrower focus, just so that we can get over very quickly whether it works in the very broad, in that particular segment of the population, and that can get you regulatory approval. Oftentimes, companies would now then do secondary follow-up studies in older or maybe more complex patients, just so that they can expand now the potential recipients of that particular vaccine. So that's how we normally do things, all right? That's in the days of when everything was fine, pre-pandemic. But during this particular phase, I guess the question now arises in the discussions between the vaccine manufacturer, developer, and the regulatory bodies. How diverse a population do they want to enroll in the initial phase 3 trials, considering the nature of the pandemic? It's affecting everybody, mostly the elderly individuals with comorbidities. So it is a very important question. And I'm not sure where which particular trial, which particular company you may be referring to, but I'm sure they've gone through a lot of these discussions, which is precisely why the Pfizer and I think the Moderna companies, they had to expand the recruitment of these more diverse populations.
Dr. Zinsu, I think you want to add something?
If I can complement, we need to admit that whatever the magnitude of a phase 3 study, it will only cover tens of thousands of people. That's not specific to the COVID vaccine. It happened to the development of all vaccines. So therefore, these tens of thousands of people cannot represent the billions of people on Earth. So this is why, even after the phase 3 clinical trial that is aiming at demonstrating the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine, the surveillance keeps going on. And there is also a monitoring of the administration of the vaccine to make sure that we capture every rare adverse event that might occur all over the world. And this is a natural process that allows to refine the indication of the vaccines along the way. So we need to admit the fact that whatever the quality of a phase 3 study, it will never ever cover all the specificity in the world, and therefore there will be some adjustment of the indication along the way. What is important is whenever you have an adverse event, it is properly managed. And that's what the authorities in each country is preparing for, making sure that first it will well identified, it is well documented, and it is well taken care of. In the context of a study, all participants are well followed on a regular basis, and there is an independent committee that is monitoring the safety aspect of each development. So I just want to reassure people on the fact that it's not because we are going faster that we are neglecting some aspect of the development of this vaccine, especially when it comes to the safety of the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jovic, are you good with that?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. We'll go next to the... Okay. Hold on. I lost it. All right. Next to ask is Michael Flores of Agence France Press.
Hi.
Mika.
Yeah, thank you, Barnes. Good afternoon to our speakers. I have a question for Secretary Dela Peña. Now that the WHO has delayed its timeline for its solidarity trial here in the Philippines, will you now recommend to the IATF to revise your policy when it comes to the prioritizing the solidarity vaccine trials in favor of independent trialists in the Philippines, given the delay in the timeline? And for Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Zinsu, I understand MSD and Sanofi Pasteur are not yet bilateral partners in the Philippines in the vaccine trial. So how keen are your companies in partnering with the Philippines and becoming a bilateral partner going forward as you progress with your own vaccine development?
Well, first of all, regarding shall we say, sliding back by 1 month of the WHO solidarity trials, we have actually already designated UPPGH to lead in the implementation. They have already identified their partners and have started already preparing the what is needed to be prepared, including facilities in the participating hospitals. We have released the money to them. So I think that will proceed, okay, maybe just delayed by a month because of the decision of WHO to move it on to December in the case of other sites. But in the case of the independent trials, these companies have already agreed that they will conduct it at their expense. So I am not sure what policy changes would be needed.
Okay. You good with that, Mika? We can go on with Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Zinsu for your second question? Or do you have a follow-up for Secretary Dela Peña?
Barnes, that's okay. We can ask Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Zinsu.
Tamesis, Dr. Zinsu?
Right. Thank you for the question. Bilateral relationship or some kind of an arrangement between MSD and the Philippine government. I think at this point in time, in trying to control the pandemic, we would encourage countries to really make full use of the COVAX facility. Why? The COVAX facility will have a whole slew of approved vaccines. We can have 10 companies all get approved vaccines, and you don't have to negotiate with each one of us. You deal with the COVAX group. And they already have different layers on how they're going to address the needs of each particular country. They have protocols, they have templates, they have contracts. And in fact, they even have the COVAX AMC, which is supposed to help financing for the countries to be able, lalo na yung sa atin, low middle income country, to be able to secure these vaccines. And the target is approximately 20%, max of about 20% of the population of the country, which the government can now choose to prioritize. We will be contributing into COVAX. I think that's our guarantee or our commitment to this particular effort to control the pandemic. We will contribute to the vaccine pool, because really billions of doses need to be manufactured. Rather than if you now start running after me, so is the US, so is Germany. It's like, okay, it becomes extremely tempting to go to the highest bidder, right? So I think let's go through the COVAX, because that really is, I think, it's really a contract that's already been arranged with all these companies in the potential target price. And as I mentioned earlier, that's actually in their website, the potential target price of something like $21 for 2 doses, if we end up with the 2-dose vaccine.
If I may complement, yes, we are contributing to the COVAX facility, but locally, as you know, we've been a partner of the DOH for decades in terms of public health. And then we are continuing this partnership with the DOH. And as a matter of fact, since the beginning of this pandemic, we managed to organize webinars to share with the healthcare providers as well as the lay public the correct information, the scientifically based information. And we will keep on doing that. And we are willing and open to contribute thanks to our expertise, to the setting of the action plan for the implementation of a COVID-19 vaccine. It doesn't matter if it's our vaccine or not. What matters is the need of the Filipinos that needs to be addressed. And if we can contribute to that, even in partnership with GSK, as we did for the development of the vaccine, with Merck for the implementation phase, we are willing to do that. Why? Because we are not fighting against each other. We are fighting against the virus, and we want to win this battle against COVID-19.
If I may add just a little bit more, remember, this is a pandemic response that each of us are all participating in. This is not a marketing sales game. This is pandemic response that I think we're all talking about here. And just if you want more, I mean, like we're actually going to do also clinical trials here in the Philippines. We're about to launch them on treatment, on new drug treatments to actually manage COVID-19 patients, be they mild to actually severe cases. So there are many opportunities where each of our companies do work with the Philippine government, place studies here when we can, to be able to help address these concerns.
Okay, I think Mika is
Maybe
good.
Barnes, I just would like to have some clarifications regarding the age, the groups who will be
Sure.
given the trials.
Sure.
I was reminded by my colleagues that in the case of Sinovac, they specifically would like to cover the elderly in their trials in the Philippines. So that is really expanding the mix. And may I just mention regarding the question on vaccine from Australia, there are really no details yet, although I am reminded that I first heard about it first week of October, but the exchange of communications regarding a possible meeting has been only this past week. So it is quite recent in terms of expressing interest.
Is it possible for President Duterte to be part of this trial then, since you said that they would be targeting the elderly? I mean, President Duterte has expressed his willingness to be part of these clinical trials.
We will submit to the decision of the implementer, UPPGH.
All right, okay. We have a few more questions here. Next is going to be coming from Sigrid Aligado of Bloomberg.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, I have a couple of questions for Secretary Dela Peña about the talks with Gamaleya. We're wondering what other requirements specifically are you asking for or waiting from Moscow? And then how soon can we expect clinical trials for the drug to, for the vaccine rather, to start here in the Philippines? As the latest that we've heard about this is that it should have started in October. And then further, how concrete are the plans to set up a pharmaceutical plant in the Philippines? Who's going to build it? And will it manufacture vaccines solely for the Philippines, or will it be sort of a hub for the region? Thank you.
Well, first of all, the vaccine expert panel only informs us that there are lacking information, that they inform Gamaleya about it, so that they are awaiting for that remaining. They can only, well, we can only guess the quantity of information that are lacking, probably about 10% is our estimate, but we cannot disclose what is the lacking information, because we are under the confidentiality disclosure agreement. But I think there are other things that have to be arranged as far as the clinical trials. So I think they have already contacted what they call a CRO, a contract research organization, which is Philippine-based, that will help them in the implementation and in tracing out whatever lacking information is needed by the expert panel, by the ethics research board, because the ethics research board is quite strict about this, just to protect the volunteers, for the protection of the volunteers. Now, with respect to the manufacturing, from the beginning, we had indications from them that they are willing to produce locally. Okay, but that is already their investment, and well, at least as far as DOST is concerned, we do not have the funds to partner with them in that undertaking. So it's basically their decision, although we welcome that, and it will be up to them to decide on the investment and other details to be able to manufacture. But for us, of course, we do not expect that the production will go all the way to the very basic components, because most likely this is already in the fill-in finish stage that will be done here. That is at least from my expectation.
Okay, thank you, Sig. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to breeze through your questions because we are running out of time. I'm gonna call on Nika Hanupol of Verifiles for the next question.
Hi, good afternoon to our speakers and FOCAP. My question is, what will it mean exactly when a vaccine is declared effective, given the limited time frame dedicated to its development? A recent feature by the British Medical Journal mentioned that the phase 3 trials currently underway are designed only for the prevention of symptomatic disease in a vaccine recipient, but not for the detection of or reduction in any serious outcomes, such as the Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, Sinovac, and Janssen. And for the other two speakers, how is this different from the endpoints of the vaccines being developed by Sanofi and MSD? Thank you.
All right.
I think we had a flow chart to show what is the purpose of phase 3. Of course, the vaccine developers could have done the phase 3 in their own respective places, or can have tried it elsewhere, but would still like to well, try it here. In the case of Gamaleya, we were informed that in the conduct of phase 3 outside of Russia, there will be other countries that will be doing it at the same time. I think 4 other countries where it will be done, the phase 3. In the other cases, for example, I think they have done phase 3 already, but maybe along the line of thinking or of reasoning that was mentioned earlier, you know, the expanding the diversity, okay, of the volunteers is also a factor to consider in trying it in another country. So that is as far as the phase 3 trials are concerned. And remember, under the Universal Healthcare Act, in fact, the Philippines is the only country that requires a phase 4, okay, because of certain experiences. But in the I think it is in the Bayanihan 2, where it was already mentioned that we can skip the phase 4 as indicated there, because after all, we are the only country that requires a phase 4. But there will be a very close monitoring of the use of the vaccine. Okay,
Okay, Dr. Zinsu?
I just want to, there are a couple of points that we need to clarify on this question. There is a difference between efficacy and effectiveness of a vaccine. So the purpose of the phase 3 study is to document the safety and efficacy, which means that you compare two populations, one who is receiving the vaccine and the other one who is not receiving the vaccines, and you compare and you see the effect of your vaccines. But when you talk about effectiveness, is the use of the vaccine in the real life setting, and that comes after. So whenever we launch a phase 3 study, we define what is called the statistical power of the study, which means that based on the parameters of the disease, we define the minimal number of people that needs to be involved in this study to make it statistically reliable, to make the result statistically acceptable. This is the purpose of a phase 3 study. And then the regulatory authorities review all the data generated from phase 1 to phase 3 and decide based on their context whether or not this vaccine is suitable for their population. And if it's the case, then they give a market authorization, and sometimes there is a post-marketing surveillance that is needed, that is requested. This is the natural process when you launch a new vaccine or when you develop a vaccine. So I don't think we're going to act differently with the COVID-19 vaccine. The time required might be shorter, but in terms of sequence, we don't do exactly the same thing. And I'm sure Dr. Bieber will complement what I'm saying.
Dr. Messi, maybe you can also talk about why you're not doing clinical trials in the Philippines for your vaccine, because you said that you're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, MSD is doing clinical trials for a potential drug, but not for the vaccine that you're developing.
Well, the question is for both of us or for?
Well, I think it may be true for both of you. Yeah.
For the time being, we are just doing the phase 1, 2. And for the phase 3 study, we haven't selected the site yet. That's where we are. So I cannot make any promise because, you know, the selection of sites is based on the epidemiological context. This epidemiological context will help you reach the objective, which is to demonstrate the efficacy of the vaccines. So therefore, you don't select the site per affinity, I would say. You select the site based on the epidemiological context. So for the time being, we haven't selected our phase 3 study site.
Yeah, and in our case, yes, as Barnes and I were chatting before we began the forum, when you do select a vaccine site, you want to make sure that there's actual transmission because you want to be able to demonstrate quickly that your vaccine actually works. If you give vaccine and placebo to the same number of population, in the span of the next 2 months or so, you want to be able to demonstrate that there's a difference. So if there's no actual community transmission or spread of the virus in a rapid manner, in all likelihood, you'll have to wait for weeks, months, forever to get an actual statistical result. And that's a good thing, if you think about it, to not put a study here in the Philippines. Because if you choose not to put if my company chooses not to put a study here for vaccines, that suggests that in our estimation, the transmission in the Philippines is relatively low. There's greater or worse transmission in other countries. Particularly now, we're hearing about the third wave in Europe, the third wave also in the US. Latin America is still in the throes of their first wave, right? So you can see where all the huge numbers of cases are actually happening. And in the Philippines, we're actually relatively fortunate today. Maybe 2 months ago, it was much, much worse, right? We were getting 4,000 cases a day, but today it's much, much better, the situation. So that's actually not necessarily a bad thing not to have a vaccine study placed here.
But is that an if, or is that a decision that has already been made by MSD?
It's looking like it's leaning that way. I haven't seen an official document, but the actual cases or actual treatment of patients who already have the infection, we can go ahead with those studies. We're about to launch them very, very soon. So next week, I think there are a couple more pieces of paper that we need to get. But basically, we're ready to start with the actual treatment trials.
Okay. Nika, did you get the answers to your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Yes? Okay. Okay. Finally, we have Aricel's Peludo.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. For Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Sinso, aside from the vaccine, are pharmaceutical companies developing actual medicines for COVID-19 patients?
Yes, we're actually developing one. It's already out. It already actually has a name, quite complicated. Molnupiravir, something like that. It's looking very promising. It's a collaboration with another company and we're very excited about the potential for this particular molecule. So we're about to launch the study here. Like I said, there are a couple of clinical trial sites that we have already selected. They've already signed contracts with us. So hopefully very soon we can begin.
From Sanofi, I mean, we had two approach. First, we look in our existing portfolio, and based on the knowledge of the vaccines, of the disease, we selected some drugs who might have an effect on these diseases. And then we are developing new medicines for that. But to make my answer short, I would say that for the time being, there is no proof of any efficacy of this attempt with the different drugs that we are testing currently. But on the other side, we are also partnering with the company to develop a test that can be done in the comfort of the house of the people. Because as you see, when you have a pandemic, you need to be able to diagnose, you need to be able to treat, and you need to be able to prevent. So we are working on these three areas, and the test that we are co-developing is currently promising.
Okay, when will these medicines be introduced or be made available to the public for usage?
Well, keeping our fingers crossed, depending on how quickly we can recruit patients and actually prove the efficacy, we're looking at sometime maybe the second semester next year. It does take time. It does take time to roll out these trials.
So you think this will be before the vaccine is, finished or done? Mm-hmm.
Probably about the same time, if not maybe a little earlier than the availability of other vaccines. Again, remember, it's not everybody will take up the vaccine. There will be always people who will refuse, or we just don't get to them in time, so they come down with an illness. So it's important to have, as part of your armamentarium, actual treatment options.
Okay. Dr. Zinto, same response? Or same
As I said, we have no promising drug for the time being, so I won't speculate on the timelines.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Last question. Wait, last question.
Okay.
Are they satisfied? Are this pharmaceutical company satisfied with how we are managing the treatment of the COVID-19 patients? That's my last question. Are you satisfied with how the Philippine government is treating it?
As a company, I don't think I can really comment on how clinical patients are being managed. That's really the medical profession to deal with. In terms of the government's pandemic response, I think they're doing the best that they can. I think in retrospect, 2020 hind vision is always perfect, right? There are things that we could have done better, but considering where we are now and considering the state that we are compared with July, August, I think we're in a better state today than we were just 2 months ago.
If I may compliment, I think it's important to realize that this pandemic is a brand new disease. So everybody is discovering what is going on, and everybody is adjusting the way they react to the situation and the understanding of the situation. On our side at Sanofi, we are supporting all the decisions that have been taken by the DOH, and we do our best to implement the recommendation requested by the DOH. So, for example, for our employees, we make sure that the PPE is available. We have also run some educational programs in order to make sure that what the government is promoting is well understood by our employees, is well understood by the community, is well understood as well by the healthcare providers. So this is our duty. It's not the time to fight against each other. It's a time to create synergies, to create this snowball effect that will protect each and every one of us.
Okay, Arizal says she's good. I have just one final question, because the three of you have spoken about how, even though this is the speed at which we're going at developing this COVID-19 vaccine is unusual, there's no step that is being skipped here. But we've also discussed issues of vaccine confidence and vaccine safety, of course. And we all know that J&J has hit a snag, AstraZeneca has hit a snag. And now we have in South Korea 48 people dying after they got the flu vaccine. So, how concerned are you that will, it's a flu vaccine and there is no proven link yet between the flu vaccine and the deaths of the 48 people in South Korea. But I think that I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but that may affect vaccine confidence in the COVID-19 development, in the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. So how concerning is that for you, Secretary De La Peña?
So far, that issue we have not yet discussed because we are also preoccupied, although we are not the leader in the procurement, but of course we are also a resource person in the procurement sub TWG. And of course, the financing part is also being discussed. These are the main concerns at the moment. The news about people who died of flu vaccine in Korea, I'm not yet sure whether they were also COVID-19 patients. Were they COVID-19 patients?
No, they got vaccinated with the flu vaccine, two specific brands of flu vaccine. But the South Korean government says there's no proven link yet between the flu vaccines and the 48 people who died.
I really cannot guess what will be the reaction of people, but basically, people I have encountered are more interested, okay, in volunteering than people that are worried about being volunteers. I don't know, maybe I just have encountered a few people, but perhaps because of the desire to have vaccination or immunity, people were saying we would like to volunteer, but I cannot cite figures. This is just random encounters.
Okay. I think Dr. Zinsu wants to say something. Yes.
Yes, if I may complement, because there are two different situations that were raised. In the context of a study, if there is a report that someone died, it's a normal procedure to stop the study until you better understand what went wrong with this person. You want to document that. So in fact, when a study is stopped, it's a good signal. It shows that you have a good independent data monitoring committee that saw an event that was not expected and decided to stop the study and get all the information and understand what went on. And probably the protocol can be adjusted if need be. So this is a very good signal when you have companies interrupting a study. It means that people are not rushing. They are doing things properly. Then you have the situation in Korea. It is important to mention that there has been no causality link established between this death and the vaccination. And we should not, be confused. There is concomitance and causality. These are two different things. And for the time being, we have a concomitance that we are questioning, and the health authorities in Korea just said that for the time being, they haven't established any causality link. And I think this is very, very important to convey as a message. This shows also that the post-marketing surveillance is functioning. So that should also reassure people that the surveillance, whether it is in the context of a study or in the usage of a vaccine, the surveillance is working, is protecting them. So therefore, this should reinforce or strengthen their confidence in the vaccine.
Okay.
Just would like to add, Barnes, that in the process of implementing the clinical trials, the Data Safety and Monitoring Committee is a requirement. So in the case of the independent trials, they will be the ones who will form their own Data Safety and Monitoring Committee. This group is different from the ones who are implementing the vaccine trials. And in the case of the WHO, we will also form a separate Data Safety and Monitoring Committee. So what Dr. Shinsho expressed, I think, is a very good explanation on the importance of monitoring. And he said that in the case of the case cited, it showed that the monitoring system was working.
Just one final question, Secretary De La Peña, if I may, because senators have been saying that the government isn't prepared for when a vaccine arrives, or when a COVID-19 vaccine finally arrives. First of all, the budget is 2 billion pesos, and the estimated budget just to be able to vaccinate 20 million people in the Philippines is 12 billion pesos. So you are 10 billion pesos short of that budget. And they're saying that they can't understand which government agency. This is in particular with Senator Tolentino. He said that he doesn't understand which agency is in the lead when it comes to vaccine trials and in preparation for the arrival of a COVID-19 vaccine here in the Philippines. So is the government prepared for when there is going to be an effective COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, maybe it is important to clarify what we have been saying all along, that in our case, we were constituted as a sub-technical working group for vaccine development. This is for the trials. And DOST was designated, we did not volunteer, was designated by IATF to chair the sub-technical working group. Now, when it comes to the procurement, there is a sub-technical working group headed by DBM. They have the procurement service. Again, it's an interagency sub-TWG. And in the case of the actual implementation of the vaccination, no other agency has the mandate but DOH.
Okay, all right.
And Barnes, just one comment about that, if I may.
Dr. Tamesis.
This is where precisely you should really start involving the professionals who know and understand logistics and travel, right? The IATA group, they're already actually putting forward recommendations as to what must be in place, or what are the systems that people need to put in place, including thinking about the refrigeration or freezer costs, right? Because like so far, what we know is that some of these vaccines require minus 70 degrees Celsius storage issues.
Mm-hmm.
So who is prepared for that, right? So it's important that this sort of discussions already happen. Just the other night, we had a webinar precisely on this particular topic. Zwillig Philippines is already looking at it as an issue they have to prepare for. So the professionals who are expert in logistics have to get involved now.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Tamesis, and of course, thank you, Dr. Zinsu, and thank you, DOST Secretary Fortunato de la Peña, for joining us this afternoon. So actually, it's not stormy anymore, at least here in Metro Manila. But do stay dry, everyone. Be careful. Thank you for this very enlightening 2-hour discussion. We thank you for your time. We thank you for your expertise. And that is the end of...
I really appreciated the presence of Dr. Tamesis and Dr. Shin Xiao.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think the three of you complemented each other very well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, that is the end then of this FOCAP forum. I would just like to announce that on Friday, we have a series of lectures. It's called the annual Teddy Benigno journalism lecture of the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines. And this year, obviously, we're doing them online, and that's the whole day. All journalism students are invited to watch live on our Facebook page, and that starts at 9 in the morning. All right? Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.